Well, hello and welcome to the Yellow Coat Club podcast. My name is Sean Little, and as always, I'm your host. Before we get started, like a couple housekeeping rules. First and foremost, the book, The Yellow Coat Club, is out now. It was released 2 weeks ago from today. And it's been really exciting to just get feedback around it. It talks about not only the origin story, but then also, kind of my journey, as part of this whole, overarching concept of the becoming. And so, it is this becoming the person that, God created us to be, and working through all of the things that tried to lie to me, that tried to bring me and move me off path. And so you'll learn more about my story there. But it's not a story about me. It's a story about all of us. We each have a story to tell. We each have something that we're going through. We each have a uniqueness to who we are, and our journey is as unique as we are. And so, my hope is that, through all of this, as I've said plenty of times, is that it is creating this community, this club of hope and healing, that we're looking, that we are courageous in the ability to step out of hiding and to start becoming. Very simple. So go check it out if you want to know more. So, I cover a lot of things in the book, and then this podcast is meant to, in the beginning at least, to, kind of layer and go a little more in depth to the things that are in there. But then through time, it's like, hey, let's get the experts on here that can talk a little more in depth about, specific topics from feedback, things that I'm hearing from other people. But then also really creating and getting more people to talk about their own becoming. And so, we're just getting started. And so this is really exciting, and always looking forward to where it's going. Today, we will be talking about eating disorders. And, I have my own personal journey of, working through an eating disorder when I was young, but then even the remnants of it still today. And I'll explain more about that. I do want to just preface and keep in mind, like, I am not... I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I'm not any of those things. And so if you have, the need for, medical advice or anything like that, like, I am not that person. I can share with you, my own journey. I can share with you the things that I've gone through and to kind of help navigate through my own experience. But if there's help that you need, if there's truly, some medical intervention that you need, I'd love to point you to resources, but I just want to make it clear, I am not that person. I don't have that training. I just have the life training that, is part of my becoming. So today, as we talk about eating disorders, one of the things, and it's been really cool to actually hear, for those of you that don't know, you can go check him out, look him up. He's, pretty famous dude. But recently in the last year, there's a famous athlete, Nick Bear, and, he's talked about, his struggle with an eating disorder. And I think that, there's so many people that, especially when it comes to men, like talking about eating disorders, it's like, that's not things that guys go through. And yet, as I've talked about it with people over the years, it's interesting to see that kind of undertow, that there are men that experience it. But when I was young, my eating disorder starting when I was 14, I thought I was completely alone. I thought eating disorders were, the things that, women experienced, and therefore I felt even more like the other than I already did. This isn't today isn't a talk about labels, but, I had the labels of, the good child, the failure, all of this, the orphan. And then now you add this new added layer, and it is that, you're bulimic. And as with all stories, you don't just all of a sudden one day and, you're where you're at. It's over time that these things come to pass. And so, obviously there's story. And so we're going to talk about story, and then we're also going to then talk about, kind of the journey from there. And so I want to take you back. Honestly, growing up, I didn't really ever think about weight. Weight wasn't a thing that I thought about. If you look at pictures of me when I was young, I was a pretty thin dude, was always doing sports. So it didn't really matter. And when I was young, I excelled at those things. And yet I think that there was a moment in my life where things started to change. And once again, I couldn't name it. And, my dad died when I was in between my 4th and 5th grade year. He passed away when I was 9. And so, it was 8 days before my 10th birthday. And so here I am, now 10 years old, and I'm going into 5th grade. And in that, I started to navigate, I was starting to play football. He passed away before my first football game. And it was interesting because all of my life before this, I kind of was thought I was a cool kid, and then, went to middle school, and it was my whole world was exposed to, something different. The moment I played football, there was that, if you could think back to your high school years, there was the quarterback and then there was everybody else. And in my mind, maybe I could be a quarterback or a wide receiver, and yet I was put on the defensive line. This, young kid that excelled in sports, that, I felt like I had so many things going for me. All of a sudden, I'm starting football and I'm your defensive lineman. And almost I'm not talking shade about defensive linemen right now at all. I know at this age, don't even really watch football, but how valuable that is. But think about it, the quarterback, defensive lineman. And so I remember during that time, my dad passed away, and I didn't really notice it, I think, until I heard comments, was that I started going to food for comfort. And so, I look back at pictures and you can kind of see where there's a shift. It wasn't Sean's super overweight. It was never anything like that. But I was not this image that got the attention. I wasn't, this cookie cutter image of, the person that was going to, get the looks from the girls, And so that's what life became about, And yet, even at that time in my life, I had made friends. I, kind of got into skateboarding and rollerblading, all this. And so I just went on and lived my life not thinking much about it. I was who I was. And instead of feeling ashamed of who I was, I just, almost pivoted to different friend groups and pivoted to different sports and continued to live my life. And then at the end of my 6th grade year, my mom got remarried, which means that we were moving again. And when my mom got remarried, I'm in another school. So I'm starting 7th grade. So I went from, intermediate school or whatever to a middle school. It doesn't really matter what kind of school it was. It was 5th and 6th grade, and now you're in 7th and 8th grade. I don't have any friends, don't know anybody. And unbeknownst to me, I, have continued to put on weight. And remember, it's relatively speaking, but I'd put on weight. And so I would go to school, not really hang out with anybody. And then I'd go home and, skateboard or something. But I was by myself, a very lonely time, and continued to go to food for comfort. And for those of you that know, I have a brother and I have a sister. And so we now, combining with, my stepdad's family, there's 6 kids. He had the kids part-time, he had gone through a divorce. And so at times there were 6 of us and at times there were not. And so, once again, the stories or things that I say, they are as I remember them. And so, I don't want to, say anything poorly about anybody, but these are just the facts and it just is what it is. And so, we had, one of my stepsisters, she was, a little bit bigger, and, but she was in Weight Watchers. And it was really tough because when I look back, I'm just like, man, I wish I could just do so many things over, and yet you can't. And so, she was teased, she was, in Weight Watchers. And like I said, it was almost like I wasn't even aware of any of this. And then all of a sudden weight became a really big thing in the house. And as someone who teased her, I know that I was teased back. People want to protect their children. People want to protect their, siblings. And, the veil was lifted, and, I started to see more and more that I didn't have the body that I thought I needed either. And so you have, you don't have the looks, don't have any friends, you're lonely, you're in this new family that, you're still grieving your father. And it was just, listen to everything I just said. It's kind of a recipe for things getting really hard. And they did. And I remember I had, I then get into 8th grade. I start making some friends. I'm skateboarding with people, and, life is what life is. And then I go into 9th grade. And I remember seeing my school pictures. And I had this weird bowl cut. My mom was really weird about hair. And so it's like trimmed around my ears. And, I also, was, in my mind, like chubby. A chubby kid with a bowl cut. Like, create that image for your head. And I remember seeing those, and I was like, I'm the chubby kid with a bowl cut with braces. And I hated how I looked. And I remember seeing the hot girls at school, whatever. And I remember being like, I was friends with them. And I was always going to be friends. Because I didn't have the looks. I wasn't the quarterback. I wasn't the anybody, and so I stayed where I was. And I remember, meeting this girl, this very sweet girl who, she just had this big personality, huge presence. And for some reason, she liked me. And that was all I needed to feel noticed, to almost chase after that feeling and want that more and more. And so, my friend group, but then like her, just like kind of became my world. I finally was feeling like I was accepted. But I still felt, and when I looked in the mirror, I didn't compare to the people that I saw around me. This image that I felt like I needed to be. And so, I started running. I started, eating really healthy. I wasn't, I was like, I'm cutting out, fried food. I'm eating grilled chicken. Like, I decided that I was going to take control of my life. And so I did. And I started to, lose weight. I started to look better. I also hit puberty, which was helpful. And, I was like, man, it was the first time I remember in, 4 years, almost 5 years, feeling good about myself. Still not, dealing with any of the underlying issues, but I felt good about myself. And meanwhile, during this time, my mom had told us that her cancer was back. She had cancer in 1997. She had beat it, and yet she had told us her cancer was back. And so once again, I found myself in, a place in life where I couldn't name how I felt. We didn't talk about feelings. That wasn't something that we did. And so, she took a pretty big health decline during this time. So meanwhile, while I'm getting healthy, my mom is going the opposite way. And even to the point, I remember hearing her upstairs. We had this computer room downstairs, and I remember I could hear her, whether it was in the morning or the afternoon or whatnot. and she'd be throwing up in her bathroom. And I remember just sitting there and my heart breaking. This woman who I loved, that I had so many differing emotions towards. And yet, it was my mom. I loved her. So one day, I'm sitting at this computer, and all of a sudden, I remember it clear as day. I had just drank some V8 Splash. This was before we found out that all the fruit juices that have all the sugar aren't as healthy as we think they are. But regardless, I had just drinking some, and I remember sitting there, and I had just heard my mom upstairs, and all of a sudden I burp, and some liquid came up. And I was like, wait, what? And I swallowed it back down, didn't know what it was, and kept on with my merry way. And it's almost like this progression. The next day it happened twice. The next day it happened 3 times. All the way to it started happening, and I was like, well, I guess I'll go spit it out. And so we had this bathroom that was right around the office, and I would walk to the office, or I'd walk to the bathroom, and I'd spit it out, and eventually it started coming up more and more, so I would run there, and actually, before I went there, I would go out the front door, and I'd spit it over the railing. And I remember my mom once saying, you need to go to the bathroom. Because food started coming up with it, and it's I can't stop putting food in my flower beds. So I started going to the bathroom, and that became a habit. And I got really scared. My mom talked to me about it. I said I had no idea what was going on. I've always had stomach issues kind of throughout my life. I remember being an anxious kid. I remember, getting sick a lot as a kid, and it always being in my stomach. And, interesting enough, I'm at a place in my life now where I've learned so much, whether it's the vagus nerve that runs down, it's, stress and anxiety response and how it resides in our stomach. There's so many inner workings, but regardless, I was now at this stage in my life that I'm hearing my mom is literally deteriorating in her health. And all of a sudden, as I was getting to my peak health, all of a sudden I start going down. Until every single day I'm throwing up. And after every single meal, I'm throwing up. And even so much as I remember my mom took me to the hospital once. They had me drink this thing called barium, which is this liquid that'll be in your stomach. And so that they literally could put me under an x-ray and monitor what happened to the liquid. So they sit me down, they lay me down, they're monitoring it, don't see anything. And so we go to look at the results, and I'm standing there looking at the results, and I look at the person and my eyes get really big, and I literally throw up right next to them. And they thought it was the strangest thing ever. They told my mom about it, and they said, I don't know what that was. And I remember even thinking when nothing did happen, when I drank it and they x-rayed me, I was like, now people are just going to think I'm full of it. I go home that day and I hear my grandma in that same study room talking to somebody saying, Sean's doing this and he's making himself do it. And I remember how hurtful that was to me. Because I didn't know what was going on in my life. I was scared. And at this point, I started to drop weight. And so it's interesting because that was the outcome that I wanted, was to drop weight and be quote unquote better looking. And yet, that's not the way I wanted it to happen. A little side tangent, that girl that I dated, I know that she struggled with an eating disorder and she shared it with me. And so, up until this time, I just, eating disorders were something I heard about. I didn't think it was going to happen to me. And I especially didn't think it was going to happen to me like that. And so here I am, later in life, and there's so many stories that are interwebbed in this, and it was just what's the time, I don't want to go on forever, stories will come up at some point, maybe you'll listen. And I was really scared. And then we got to the point in my life where my mom, we got to the point in my life where my mom, she was passing away. There was the day, I've talked about it a little bit, and we'll talk about it more, is the day that she passed away. I was up in Holland, Michigan. I was up there, and, we were doing something for spring break. And I remember, all of a sudden there was this rush that we needed to get down to the hospital because my mom was not doing well. And even then, as we were driving down, I had a bucket literally in my hands just in case I was going to throw up, because it was happening all the time. And so we go down and my mom passes away. And I even remember that night, I think my uncle brought me to go get, some food. And I remember even in the hospital, everything I tried to eat was just in the bathroom throwing up. And this was also around the time of my life where I wanted it to come up. I wanted to feel something. And even if, I was liking the results, it now at this point in my life absolutely controlled me. My experiences with bulimia, I've had, kind of bouts with, withholding food for myself, whatever. And yet, it's interesting that we tell ourselves, the story is, I got this. I'm in control. I'm the one that's calling the shots. But addiction doesn't work like that. We become a slave to it. Addiction is the thing that it owns us. Anybody that tells you that they've got it under control, oh, I'm in control, I'm doing that. No, you're not. I'm sorry. I can't tell you you're an addict, but once you sit there and you're processing and know that you're going through addiction, you are not the one who's in control. The master is. And I bent the knee far too often to my master. And so now, I'm at a place in my life where my mom's gone, don't have my father. And, this is a story told another time, but now where am I going to go? So I'm moving once again. I went to go live with a family friend for a while, but I couldn't hang. I was too anxious. I was too everything, and at this point, just all I could do was throw up. I wanted to die. And I felt like I was literally on a mission to die. And I ended up, through a long string of events that now I'm up in Michigan. I'm living with family. And once again, at this point, I literally just it was part death wish, part I'm not going to even try to stop this. And so, imagine the insanity where I literally would go and eat whatever food I could get my hands on, be so full, then go, oh my God, I have to get rid of what's in here because of whether it's anxiety or grief or literally just the fact where I was like, I don't want to get fat. So I'd go into the bathroom and sometimes I could just throw up. Or if I couldn't do that, I would drink a bunch of water, get my stomach into a place where it just came up. And that was the lie. I told myself, well, if I'm the one that's going to do that, I'm in control. No, I'm not. Because there I would be on bended knee before my porcelain God, going, why won't this stop? And while this isn't a conversation about my faith, faith is just such a big thing and it plays so many parts. And I remember I would say literally audibly, wasn't something I was thinking. I would say it out loud to God. I'd lay down on the floor after throwing up once again, and I'd literally say, God, I've read your book. You parted the Red Seas. You healed literally people of their illnesses, their sores, their everything. Why won't you heal me? I'm right here praying to you. I'm asking you right now, heal me. And yet I would throw up again, and down the cycle we'd go. And I'm now the 15-year-old, freak going to another school. And this became my place of hiding, And after losing your parents, and now you have an eating disorder that is absolutely out of control, I firmly believed that if God was real, that he sure had no love or care for me. Because in my mind, he could stop it at any point. And yet there I was suffering further and further. And so throughout those years, I went to new schools. I changed places. I tried to hide. People would find out. I once confided in a friend at a new school, and he went and told everybody. My secret was out. I felt so betrayed, and so I hid longer. I ended up switching schools. And I don't exactly remember fully. I was told at one point, it was through, a prayer request network or whatever. But all I know is that I thought I was hiding in a bathroom, throwing up, and everybody knew. Everybody knew. And so, this thing, this secret, this such a vulnerable thing in my life, everyone knew. In senior year in high school, my family just had no idea what to do with me. You can hear me from the bathroom. I'd try to turn on the faucet to buffer the noise. But at this point, anytime Sean goes to the bathroom, it's under an assumption that that's what he's going to do. And that was kind of the life I created. And so there's this woman that was a mother at the school that I went to, and they had talked to her. She had success in her eating disorder. She had victory. She had freedom. And so they said, we don't know what we're doing, but maybe she does. Maybe she can help him. And so I remember the first time I got on the phone with her, and, she was like, hey, will you come, you want to come meet up with me? And it was so crazy because literally in my mind, I was like, I'm going to go eat more food. Like, I have my routine tonight. You're not going to mess with that. And so I said, hey, I can come another time. And she said, oh, is that your eating disorder talking? Like, what do you actually have to do right now? And I was like, oh my God, she knows. For the first time, someone knew the schemes. So I went and saw her, and I just absolutely hated that someone knew as well as I did. And in fact, because she had navigated this longer than I had, she knew all the tricks. So eventually we started meeting, and we would be talking, and still, I'd have some success, but not really. I was still throwing up. I was still struggling. And so, one day my aunt and uncle came to me, and they were like, hey, we're thinking maybe you should go live with her for a little while. And it's interesting because at that point it was just like, nope, now I've really done it. No one, how are you going to take me? They don't know what to do with me. No one knows what to do with me. I don't know what to do with me. And now I have to go live at another person's house. All the while thinking, God, you could take this away in an instant. And yet, here I am. And throughout this time, I'd been hospital before. At my lowest, I had reached 117 pounds. Like I was just, I look back at pictures and I'm like, you were skin and bone. I went and lived with this woman, and it helped a little, but I was unwilling to deal with the things I had in my life. And so even though I was there and then I left, I wasn't cured. I wasn't healed. And high school got done, and I went off to college. And I carried the exact same thing with me to college. But what's interesting is I found ways to combat, Through drinking, I didn't really think about it. Through taking Adderall, that would suppress my appetite, so I could, I didn't throw up whenever I took Adderall because I didn't eat very much. And so I, at one point, had an Adderall addiction. I was taking Adderall every single day. And so I'd be like, wow, I haven't thrown up in a year. You've been taking Adderall for a year, so you're in a different hole. And I think by the time I was like 22 or 23, even when the Adderall faded and, now I've addiction jumped. I'm drinking every single day. I'm, borderline alcoholic. I felt like I just kind of outgrew the purging. And so in my mind, in this really weird, messed up way, I was like, well, I'm cured. No, it wasn't. Because what happened after that was continually being, it wasn't about the weight. It was somewhat about the weight, but it was all about the vanity of, what am I supposed to look like? How do I present myself to the world? How is the world going to love me? If I look a certain way, if my hair's a certain way, if I speak a certain way, if I show up a certain way, the world will accept me. And so at some point, it stopped being about the weight, and it was everything about how I could present myself. What was my bank account like? What were the jobs that I had? How did I get to weave together a story or a narrative that somebody would come alongside me and love me? And what you can see from the beginning to how this all gets interwoven is then now I start putting my certainty in women, because that was the litmus test. Remember back in high school, it was literally that beginning part where I went to school. When I was younger, I had the cute girlfriend that I wasn't. You had the quarterback, and I'm the defensive lineman, and I switched schools, and I don't have friends, and I'm anxious. And then she noticed me, and it always became about the girl noticing me. I wanted to be accepted and loved by the world. The only problem with that is that if you are looking for your certainty in another person, a place, a thing, whatever it is bound to fall, because it's fragile, it's frail. You're building your house on sand. And yet my worth was always determined by what does the world have to say to me. Remember, a couple episodes ago, you'll read about in the book, The Good Child. I lived to be admonished. I lived to be praised. And that also includes your looks. And so you got to look a certain way. I remember at almost my lowest, at the height of my drinking, I saw my weight go up to the highest it had ever been. So there I was, trapped in addiction, this time drinking, not purging. But now I'm overweight and I'm just unhealthy. And I internalized all of that and started to hate myself more and more and more and more. I heard from one of my coaches once, the idol always betrays the worshiper. I'll say that again. The idol always betrays the worshiper. I've idolized women. I've idolized image. You name it. And that's where I was. Always putting my certainty, always putting my worth in what somebody else said to me, and especially what a girl thought of me. Always living for that praise. And I remember when I was at my lowest, I was like, we got to do something about this. So I started getting healthy and eventually did the thing that I needed to do, which was to stop drinking. Interestingly enough, fun fact, drinking's really terrible for your weight. And when I stopped drinking, I lost some weight pretty rapidly. And yet for the longest time, it just continued to be image, 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 image. I have been worrying about being bald since I was like age 23. Always looking at the comb, checking how many hairs went out. Vanity. And that's what I lived for. And so why do I tell this story? I say all of this because there's so many things that are happening all at once. Is like, it's not, sometimes things are the symptom of such an underlying problem. You know, I, even to this day, like just because I'm not purging or anything like that, I can go look into a mirror and I can tear myself apart. Chest not big enough, arms not big enough, legs not defined enough. I got a roll in my stomach. It doesn't matter. Or most recently, it's the craziest thing. There's a point to all of this, I promise, but it all comes down to how we view ourselves. And if it's based in how we look, guess what? You're going to get old one day. And look at how many people have spent so much time and money trying to look younger. And yet, newsflash, you're not getting any younger. I always took so much pride in my smile. And, you know, last year I ended up having to get a root canal, and there was a tooth, you know, this was a trauma thing that happened when I was much younger. And then this year, I then started noticing that one of my teeth was getting discolored. And I was like, oh, maybe I need to go get another root canal. And I went and saw them, and they said, hey, you know, you don't need a root canal. Tooth's fine. But because of the trauma that happened and the callousing that happened, it's starting to discolor. And I said, what can I do about it? And they said, well, you could try a root canal. You could do some internal bleaching. But they said it might not stay. And so you would pay X amount of dollars and you don't know the results. There was that part of me that really wanted to go down that route. And yet there was that part of me that said, can you be okay with like not being perfect? You're healthy. Can't that be enough? You're loved. Can't that be enough? You're home. You've been reconciled. You've been brought back into the arms of your literally heavenly loving Father. You continue to work through all of this garbage in your life. Can you let it go and just accept your mortality? Can you accept that you're not perfect? And so on the bad days, yeah, I can sit there and tear my weight apart. I can think that I'm not where I want to be and say, well, oh, you know, I'm just striving for excellence. Or you're just beating the crap out of yourself. Unnecessarily. Always trying to measure up. But at the end of the day, I got to go to sleep with me. I'm the one who's got to look in the mirror and look at me. And at some point, I made an agreement that I was going to stop living for the world. And so my encouragement to you is today, if you're struggling with an eating disorder, like it's going to lie to you. It's lying to you. The mirror is lying to you. All of those things are literally just the world speaking to us. And at the end of the day, there is a place where there is hope and healing, and it is not out there. It's up there, and it's here. And my hope is that you would be able to reconcile with yourself today, with your mortality, with the fact that you're not perfect. And yet you are deserving of love. And you are loved. And we just continue to be fearless in working through the things that try to trap us and keep us down. We step out of hiding. You know, we stop making excuses for, oh, I'm just being healthy. Like, well, You're not eating, so I don't know how healthy that is. But once again, I'm not here to tell you your issue. I can't tell you if you have an eating disorder. If you think that you might have one, maybe you do. If you think you have a vanity problem, you might. I'm not here to tell you that. But I am here to tell you that none of us are perfect. And yet, for some reason, we continue to keep striving. If you ever want to have a dose of reality or a dose of, humble pie or anything like that, go look at a picture of a bodybuilder and go just see them all shredded and ripped on the day of and then go look at them in the off season. Or go look up the tireless amount of work that people have to do to have that perfect body. It's easy to go on social media and see this idea of perfection, and yet, what does the journey look like to get there? And do you have the stamina to get there? Because I have seen what people have to do. I have read about what people have to do, and it's exhausting. And at what point does that become not worth chasing? Because when we think about the becoming, I've determined I want to be healthy. And also, I want to be the person that God created me to be. And He didn't make me perfect. There was one who was perfect. And yet, even in our minds was, washboard abs, all that? No, perfect in stature. Perfect in character. Blameless in every way. We need to redefine and become people that redefine what it means to just be okay. To be healthy and be okay. To care for ourselves and care for our others and be okay. That's all there is. And healing is ongoing. The becoming is ongoing. So we got to talk about it. Men have eating disorders. People have eating disorders. If you're going through something right now, go talk to somebody. Stop living in hiding. Stop allowing this thing to keep you in hiding. And whatever it is, the approval that you're seeking, the perfection that you're seeking, I keep going back to, and I'll end with this. It's this verse that continues to speak to me over and over and over. What good is it if I gain the world and yet lose my soul? Think about, you could be the complete model of perfection, and yet if you are miserable and empty inside, was it worth it? And I, at least for me, know my answer on that one. I look forward to talking more about this, and honestly, like comments, feedback, anything, I'd like to hear from you, and either unpack something, see if I need to correct something, or go look in the mirror myself. But as always, I'm going to choose to become. Not what the world said, but the one who fearfully and wonderfully made me. So thank you today for joining me on the Yellow Coat Club podcast. As always, click subscribe, go check out Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, whatever. Buy the book. Join the club, man. And let's be courageous. Step out of hiding and start becoming. Until next time.